The TETRA is finally here, and it's as awesome as it looks. Premium, stylish, you name it. But is it worth the €300 price tag? Yes and no. I have a pre-production model of the 12.5-liter TETRA R and the silver colorway coined Moonstone. And for the most part, this is what will arrive at your doorstep if you're among the initial pre-order group. With bold curves and a striking silhouette, standing 354mm tall, 94mm thick, and 375mm long, taller than most while being thinner than most, an interesting trade-off. The 4mm thick aluminum body is one continuous piece with zero gaps or extrusions. The TETRA looks familiar because it shares the same design ideology as the Nanook. The elongated cutouts on the extruded aluminum unibody shell, the front panel sliding struts for the case locking mechanism, and a solo USB-C port, along with a branded power button right front and center. Simply slide the right tab and it's unlocked, and the left tab exposes the USB-C port. Extracting the interior frame is where you'll encounter your first pain point. Like the Nanook, my samples suffer from the same bare metal-to-metal contact, coincided by uneven and jittery feedback when sliding the shell off, a sound that you'll never quite get used to. But that being said, you'll never really hear that sound more than a few times. However, this is where many of the similarities end. Instead of the open sandwich-style rail-centered design of the Nanook, we get a structural backplate as the main source of rigidity apart from the aluminum shell, connecting both the rear and the front panel. Off the bat, the layout looks foreign, met with three compartments: the motherboard compartment supporting ITX motherboards, the PSU compartment with support for up to an ATX power supply, unlike the smaller S model which only supports SFXL, and the GPU compartment accommodating massive 4-slot cards up to 353mm long. To connect the motherboard and GPU, there's an extremely short riser cable making the connection, which also requires you to install the motherboard from behind onto these elevated metal standoffs. The GPU compartment uses a more traditional method with screws securing the card's backplate to the rear of the case. This combined with a metal block that jams into place, which at first I didn't understand, but I've come to really appreciate. The front I/O is very minimal with a USB 3.0 to USB Type-C port, which will be updated to a more modern USB-C motherboard header for production units. Thorazone recommends building in a particular order: GPU, motherboard, cables, power supply, and then the optional case fan. Let's go to RTX 5080 Founders Edition card, the very first card I thought of when I saw the initial design of the TETRA. You actually need to remove the metal standoff near the GPU riser to gain access to the screws to secure the GPU in. It's super simple to install. It drops down into the Gen 5 link-up riser cable, and with that middle wedge, it's super secure. To continue my run with silver-themed builds, I'm using the MSI BA50i Edge Ti again, a very competent B-series board that looks insane in the TETRA. Most people looking at this case will be eyeing the Ryzen 7 9800X3D. It's extremely powerful for gaming and not incredibly difficult to keep cool. To contrast the silver, we have the black Team Group Expert T-Crate memory with a capacity of 32GB at 6000 mega transfers. Because the TETRA R specifically supports air coolers up to 70mm, I went with the renowned IS67XT from ID Cooling. Side note, this cooler is awesome. Simple installation with 2 mounting brackets to rotate the cooler any direction you want. I elected to use the longer bracket because there was some conflict with the cooler and the power adapter when I performed my initial test build. I highly recommend connecting your power button and USB-C cable before securing the motherboard down. Almost impossible to do it after the fact. Now it's time to maneuver the motherboard into place, a very unique experience elevated onto 4 metal standoffs, which secures from the backside of the board. There's a metal tab milled near the motherboard I/O cutout. This wasn't a critical issue. After a quick wiggle, it does finally slide into place. This issue has already been addressed in the final production unit. When securing the board down onto the standoff, the screws may give you some resistance, but with some light force, they'll seat properly. Difficulty connecting the cables can vary from motherboard to motherboard. On my board, the rest of the I/O was easily accessible and connecting the cables weren't super complicated. With the riser, I found it a bit easier to install when the board is already secured. It just can't extend any further. However, it's not incredibly difficult. I'm going with the Asus Low-Key 750W SFXL Platinum rated power supply, which is secure via 3 included case screws, not the screws that come with the power supply itself. There is an optional area to install a 120mm fan. However, this is only if you use the SFX power supply. Since I'm using the SFXL power supply, I can't install the fan in that orientation, but I can flip it to feed air into the GPU instead, which I did. There are only 2 screw points to mount the fan, since this is technically an unofficial use case. After some brief off-camera cable management, we're left with a fully assembled frame. At this point, you have to decide which way you want to orient the case. We have the option to lay it flat or stand it up. And they even offer chrome feet to give it that extra pop. The chrome feet fasten into the shell cutouts from the inside. This really elevates the look of the Tetra in my opinion, and the horizontal orientation just looks next level. And if you do go the horizontal route, I highly recommend picking up some type of rubber pads to keep the feet from digging into your desk or surface. Noise is actually pretty good, no turbulence on either the CPU fan or the 5080's fans. However, I can't say the same thing about the unofficial GPU fan mod. It roars at full power. I found it doable at the bare minimum RPM range. The NFA 12 15mm Chromax fan supports 500 RPM, which is slightly disappointing seeing that it's a great opportunity for extra cooling for the 5080. Let's take a look at some thermals. I ran a 10-minute multi-core stress test in Cinebench R24 with an ambient room temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. I tested 3 orientations, the motherboard at the top, the GPU at the top, and the horizontal orientation. No surprise, but all 3 maxed out at 95 degrees, with the GPU on top scoring slightly higher than the others. What about gaming? We ran Cyberpunk 2077 in 1440p and 4K. We see a slight variation in CPU temperature at 1440p between 1 to 2 degree difference. In 4K, the trend sort of flips with the GPU up position performing marginally better. In the horizontal orientation, CPU temps are slightly warmer as well. On the GPU side, things get a little bit more interesting. In 1440p, the motherboard up position sees the lowest temps, 4 degrees below the others. This trend expands further in 4K with a 6 to 9 degree gap between the motherboard up and the horizontal and the GPU up position. Thermals are in line for a 5080 and a 9800 X30 combination, although not the best, a far cry from terrible. While I do have the pre-production unit, it's very close to the final retail version. I do really enjoy the Tetra. It's a true centerpiece for your office, desk, or media console. While there are some drawbacks like the bare metal-to-metal contact, most issues I've encountered are already addressed. I'm a bit disappointed in the fan turbulence from the case fan. Still, thermals are in check. I believe there is a way to swap the power button if you want to go with the motherboard up position, which I recommend. There are no dust filters, so you probably will hear that metal-on-metal contact sound more often after all. The updated retail model will have the more modern USB Type-C motherboard header instead of the USB 3.0, a more rigid structural support bar on the internal frame, and refinements to make installing the motherboard more seamless. Both the Tetra S and R will come in several colors like carbon, graphite, pine, moonstone, and chalk, with a handful of add-ons like the walnut front, the chrome feet, and the light hub. I highly recommend the chrome feet. Just try to find something to put the feet on to preserve your desk or table surface, especially if you go with the horizontal position. The Gen 5 link-up riser cable is an optional add-on, and the Tetra will come with a Gen 4 cable by default. Fully spec'd out, the price tag spikes to €414, so obviously this isn't for everyone. If you're going to store a PC in the corner of a room, then this definitely isn't for you. Someone that may find this case useful are people with a home theater, high-end media center, or someone that really wants to elevate their desk space. You could definitely find a case with a similar fit and finish and more hardware compatibility for a lower price, but the experience of the Tetra R is one-to-one. Let's talk about the Tetra's placement in Thorzone's lineup. The Nanook is priced above the base and maxed out Tetra, while the Tetra looks slightly more premium in my opinion. You're much more limited in the cooling department also, up to a 240mm AIO on the Nanook S and a 280mm AIO on the R, whereas the Tetra supports up to a 70mm air cooler on the R and 54mm on the upcoming S. And you get slightly better GPU compatibility with the Nanook. The Nanook is also a bigger case, which means more material overall. What do you think about the new Tetra R? Is it too big? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching.